following is a special presentation of HBO's Sports of the 20th Century. Nearly 150 years ago, college football took root in the North. As it migrated south, it assumed a religious significance, with a passion unrivaled in any other region of the country.
Even Coach Bryant gets a triumphant victory ride.
Over the next century, games played across the South embodied deeply held traditions that some felt would never die.
Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
Those who dared to challenge those traditions did so at great peril.
I will die standing up for the freedom of my country.
Some fought their battles in the streets, others on college campuses, still others on collegiate football fields.
A miraculous catch by Thomas Gossam, a junior from Birmingham.
For many, it was an act of sheer bravery to take the field.
Look at the move this kid can make.
In the face of untold abuse, they stood up to the system in the name of integrating their schools and conferences. The legacies of their struggles echo across every football field in the South.
The stadium in Birmingham is like stadiums in a lot of major cities. There are in basically economically depressed areas or what have you, poor areas, and in some cases black areas. Well, the stadium wasn't too far from where we lived. So on those Saturdays, our neighborhoods were just invaded by white people. My dad hated it. He hated when Auburn played Alabama or when Alabama played in the town, because they came to our neighborhoods and they took over. And it wasn't to see us, it wasn't to speak to us, it wasn't to say hey to us, it was to go to the football game. And so you really had nothing to do with it.
Roll Tide, roll!
It was a divided culture, of course, because there was segregation.
Roll Tide!
I remember when Dr. King came to Birmingham, Alabama, he said, "This town is as segregated as Johannesburg, South Africa." And he was right.
Birmingham, Alabama, the toughest city in the United States in race relations.
When you thought of Birmingham, you thought of Bull Connor, the public safety commissioner.
You've got to keep the white and the black separate.
You thought of fire hoses. You thought of the ferocious attack dogs.
There's no doubt that police brutality is a reality in Alabama.
I don't know how anybody who kind of just fell out of space and saw some of this stuff, and you think, God, what's going on in this country?
A man or men threw a bomb into a Negro church and killed 4 Negro girls who had been at Sunday school.
You can travel across this entire land. There ain't no place like Birmingham.
Where we talk about segregation occurring, most generally are the states of the former Confederacy. And in terms of football, we're talking about a footprint that is going to include 3 major conferences.
By the mid-50s, the 3 Southern conferences, the Atlantic Coast, the Southwest, and the Southeastern, stretched across 13 states from Texas to Maryland.
We're talking about a region in the country that is defined by the institution of slavery. We are talking about a region in the country that is going to be branded with the Civil War. We are talking about a region in the country that does not escape its past.
By the mid-1950s, only a handful of Southern schools had integrated campuses. Much of the region still resisted.
But now then they want to come into our school to play football on the team out here with your boys. We have no intention whatsoever, and we shall not integrate our school.
In 1954, the Supreme Court, in the case of Brown versus Board of Education, declared that separate but equal education was illegal. However, much of the South ignored the ruling.
I hope to go on and become a student that will be a credit to the university.
In 1956, Autherine Lucy made a brief but failed attempt to integrate the University of Alabama.
There are death threats. There are people following her. She's being heckled. She's facing a very difficult time at the university. It's not a successful attempt because there's not much institutional backing to give this woman a chance to succeed.
Alabama's refusal to integrate its classrooms meant that its football program, once the pride of the South, remained all white. But with the civil rights movement about to turn its attention to Alabama, the football program was in for a shakeup. The first sign of change was a new coach.
The Alabama football program that Paul Bryant inherited in 1958 was an absolute shambles. J.B. Ears Whitworth was an incredibly inept coach. He had won 4 games in 3 years, including a winless season in 1955.
Bryant comes in, and the team travels in coats and ties, starts making them go to class. There was a real feeling that there was a new sheriff in town, and particularly the team began to have some romance about it.
Paul Bryant began his coaching career at the University of Maryland in 1945. After turning the program around in a single season, Bryant left for Kentucky, which a couple years later would have the only integrated student body in the SEC. Bryant saw an opportunity.
Bryant wanted to integrate the University of Kentucky program.
Kentucky isn't a great football state, so maybe by expanding the net and including African Americans, he will have a better team.
But according to those who were around at the time, the president, Dr. Donovan, was afraid that if they integrated the athletic program, they would be risking their membership in the Southeastern Conference, which was lily white.
Nonetheless, Bryant again proved to be a winner, and in 1950 led Kentucky to its first SEC championship. After a stint at Texas A&M, he landed his dream job.
I'm Paul Bryant, football coach, University of Alabama.
Bryant's mandate was to rebuild Alabama's football program. But in the midst of escalating civil rights activities, it wasn't long before outside influences were being felt.
He won 5 games in 1958. In 1959, they won 7 games and went back in the bowls.
Fans are in the stands for the first edition of a new postseason grid event, the Liberty Bowl.
When Alabama went off to play Penn State in the Liberty Bowl, many members of the Alabama Board of Trustees wanted to boycott the game because Penn State was integrated.
Despite the objections at home, Bryant made the decision to play.
I think the reason he accepted that Liberty Bowl game, I don't think it was a racial fixture as much as he wanted to get some national recognition for him and the team and the university.
Alabama lost the Liberty Bowl, but Bryant had turned the team's fortunes around. In 1961, the Crimson Tide went undefeated, giving Bryant his first national championship. Alabama was again the class of the nation, and Bryant was calling all the shots.
We're particularly proud of our seniors because in 4 years they wound up being what I think is the best team in the United States.
By the fall of 1962, half the universities in the South had integrated their campuses. In Mississippi, change would come, but not without a fight.
Governor Ross Barnett again refused to permit Negro student James Meredith to enroll at the University of Mississippi.
When James Meredith applied, the governor of Mississippi, Ross Barnett, was determined to resist.
Are you with us in this fight?
He was an active member of the White Citizens Council in the 1950s, and in fact, his gubernatorial speech was never will I allow this great university to be integrated. We'll close the University of Mississippi. Well, for a football player, that means you're going to close our season.
Optimism had been running high on the Oxford campus as the Ole Miss Rebel football team was poised to take a run at their second national championship in 3 years.
I'm not sitting there thinking about, is it morally right or wrong to support James Meredith's admission? I was thinking about the football season. Is it in jeopardy?
On Saturday, September 29th, Governor Barnett made one last gesture in his attempt to keep Ole Miss all white.
It's Saturday afternoon, and while we're preparing for a football game that night, Ross Barnett's on the telephone finalizing a deal.
Governor, this is the president speaking.
In the days leading up to Saturday, the Kennedy White House negotiated with Barnett to enforce the Supreme Court ruling that gave Meredith the right to admission at the University of Mississippi.
Under the Constitution, I have to carry that order out. Now, I'd like to get your help in doing that.
To maintain calm, Barnett and Kennedy agreed that Meredith would register for classes 180 miles away on the Jackson campus.
In our locker room, we knew nothing about this. We had a football game to play. What was going on between the Kennedys and the Barnetts was the furthest thing from our minds.
Ole Miss had won its season opener and was leading Kentucky 7-0 at the half.
When we came out of the locker room for the second half, the strangest sight I've ever seen on a football field. At the 50-yard line, at a microphone, was Governor Ross Barnett. He had taken over the football field.
Chairman and my fellow Mississippians.
The crowd's going wild. They're standing, waving Confederate flags. It really brought to my mind Nuremberg, a grand arena, and here's the Hitler of the day whipping up the crowd.
I love Mississippi.
It was almost surreal.
I love her people.
Then the last part of it could only mean one thing.
I love and I respect our heritage.
I love white supremacy. I love the way we do things here. And nobody outside this area really understands that. We take the field and we play a magnificent second half. And we win the game. Ross Barnett went back to the governor's mansion and he said to his aides, "Did you hear the roar of the crowd?" So he picked up the telephone and called Kennedy and said, "The deal is off."
How can I violate my oath of office? How can I do that and live with the people of Mississippi?
Despite Barnett's refusal, President Kennedy ordered Meredith to register at the Oxford campus under federal protection. Meredith was due to arrive Sunday.
What I remember specifically on Sunday morning is the roar of aircraft overhead. And we learned that it was the first wave of federal protection. And they're in full riot regalia. And of course, we all went over to see what was happening.
The President and Mississippi.
Mr. James Meredith is now in residence on the campus of the University of Mississippi. You have a great tradition to uphold on the gridiron as well as the university campus. And the honor of your university and state are in the balance.
At almost exactly the same time that he said that, things are clearly out of control. There was violence. And then every one of the marshals opened up with their tear gas canisters. It sounded like the beginning of a war. We all ran.
I hear they got some high-powered rifles up there that have been shooting sporadically. This man has just died. Did he die? Yes. Well, you see, we got to get order up there, and that's what we thought we were going to have.
And in a sense, our greatest fears were being realized. All of this political involvement is threatening our season.
Rioting by students and outside agitators continued until early Monday, when nearly 20,000 federal troops arrived on campus and managed to restore order. Later that morning, Meredith officially became a student at Ole Miss. But the imposing military presence made the Oxford campus feel like a war zone.
We go out to the practice field and we can't practice because it's taken over by the military. I mean, you talk about politics taking over football and doing it all in the name of keeping an institution all white, which meant keeping the football team all white.
Once calm prevailed, the Ole Miss Rebels settled back into football and did not lose a game. They finished the season at 10-0 and were ranked third in the nation. On campus, football was again the rallying cry.
But I think for many in the student body, for alumni, certainly for the people in the state of Mississippi, this was something of a vindication. Football was something of a resurgence of state pride.
To Governor Barnett's dismay, Meredith stayed at Ole Miss and became the first black student to graduate from the university. For Southern schools like Ole Miss, the next hurdle would be the football field. In 1963, the civil rights movement gained momentum, and in cities throughout the South, voices of protest were being sounded.
It was a very heady time to be living. And to be a college student in the 60s with all of this going on, you know, you felt like you had some purpose in life. Fortunately, living in Washington, D.C., of course, I had the opportunity to see a lot of the activities firsthand. I was at the march when Martin Luther King made the great speech.
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
As I started getting into this football thing, I would reflect back on that. I would start thinking about this dream, you know, that one day every man would be equal. And the words of his speech came into play.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty!
Often forgotten are the many foot soldiers who waged the battle against segregation on the field. One soldier at the front line of that battle was Darrell Hill.
One day I get a call from Lee Corso, who was the freshman coach at Maryland. Lee said, "Darrell, we'd like you to come play football here in Maryland." And my reaction was, you know, Lee, I want to play some football. I don't know about being Jackie Robinson. You know, so.
Hill had been a pioneer everywhere he went, first at his Washington, D.C. high school, then during his brief tenure at the Naval Academy as a member of the freshman team with Roger Staubach. He was about to break ground again as the first black football player in the South.
They had bylaws, an agreement among member teams that you will not play black athletes. In fact, Clemson and South Carolina threatened to leave the conference.
In a time of uncertainty, Hill found a friend and supporter on campus.
We wound up in the same economics class together, and this stuff was going over my head, and Darrell wasn't even taking notes. I realized that Darrell was a brilliant student, so I made him an offer.
You get me through school, and I'll look out for you on the football field when we're traveling in the South.
The bond between Hill and Fishman led to their unique nickname.
We were roommates, and he being the only black and me being the only Jew, we used to call ourselves the Onlys. And Darrell and I would find ourselves in different situations because we were out on the street together.
We go to a Woolworths. We sit at this lunch counter. And of course, you got to remember, this is right during the sit-ins. They come down and they serve everybody. Get down to me, and they said, "Sorry, but we don't serve colored people here."
And I said, "Well, we don't eat them, so you better get us some Cokes." So I got upset and just cleaned the counter off of all the trays and plates that were stacked up.
I'm saying, "Fishman, you know, you're crazy, you know. You can't do this." I said, "You're Jewish, but you don't have a Star of David on your forehead. You know, I'm out here by myself." Now, you know, he didn't realize how volatile that could be in Durham, North Carolina in 1963.
When it came to volatility within black activist circles, Hill found it in abundance.
One of the prominent civil rights activist groups was a group called the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, known as SNCC. It was headed up by a brilliant young man. His name was Stokely Carmichael, and his deputy was a very volatile young man named H. Rap Brown.
One thing we found out about the honky: you give him an inch, he want a yard. You give him a yard, he'll burn a cross on it every time. You better watch.
They were students at Howard University. One day, Carmichael and Brown came to me and said, "Look, we'd like you to lead some demonstrations out at Maryland." And I said, "Well, wait a minute. I don't have time to be leading demonstrations. You know, I'm playing football. I mean, that's my role in the movement." Rap Brown, who was very volatile, called me a punk. Of course, I slammed him into the wall. Carmichael had to get between us. And so Stokely finally said, "Look, he's doing more than enough playing football and integrating athletics in the South." One of the toughest places I played was Clemson University. You know, 50,000 drunk Southern gentlemen are waiting wonderful to see this brother come out on the field.
It was kill the nigger. The nigger ain't playing. We were shocked.
Not a black person in the stands anyway. The black people had to sit outside the stadium on a red dirt hill called Nigger Hill, and that's where they watched the game.
To know that you're going to be the target of this hatred had to play on his mind.
Talk about double team, I was triple team. Every time I would look up there and see these black people sitting on this dirt hill, I said, there's something wrong with this picture. This has got to be fixed. Now I'm mad. So I said, I'm going to show these folks. Well, I caught 10 balls, which set a ACC single-game pass catching record, which stood for a long time. And I can remember they came down from the hill when the game was over to the bus and were congratulating me. That was a good feeling. That was a really good feeling.
Darrell is an absolute hero. I mean, I have one piece of memorabilia in my life, and it's a picture of Darrell Hill on my wall. And that's the only one I have, and it's the only one I'll ever have.
When I first started, I made the statement about not trying to be Jackie Robinson. I rapidly grew out of that, and it came around to the point that, you know, I do have a role and do have a mission here, and what I'm doing is very valuable.
In 1963, the Atlantic Coast Conference underwent racial progress, with the University of Maryland integrating its football field. But farther south in Alabama, progress was moving in reverse.
Segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
George Wallace was elected governor of Alabama and took office in January 1963.
My father ran for governor in 1958 as a moderate on the issue of race and segregation, and he lost. He said, I talked about roads and economic development and education and quality of life issues, and they just sat there. And he said, I talked about segregation, and they stomped the floor. And so in 1962, when he ran again, he made a bargain, if you will, to get elected.
He recognized that the candidate most likely to win is a candidate who said nigger, nigger, nigger the loudest.
In his first term as governor, Wallace proclaimed his agenda with the defining gesture of his career.
The University of Alabama campus at Tuscaloosa is under a tight security guard of state police as Governor George Wallace prepares to prevent 2 Negro students from registering at the last all-white state university.
Eventually, Wallace moved aside, and James Hood and Vivian Malone became Alabama's first black students. The face of the university had changed forever. The question remained, how would integration affect the school's football program?
You can do. That little old spring. Come on, just come on. That little old spring.
By the mid-60s, Alabama had become a national powerhouse.
From 1960 to 1966, Paul Bear Bryant's University of Alabama teams put together a combined record of 68, 6, and 3. This is by far the most successful football team in the country during this era.
The team's success had lifted Bryant to iconic status in the South.
Coach Paul Bryant gets the victory ride on the show.
Coach Bryant was so popular, I'm not sure that he's not the only man in Alabama. My dad probably feared running against him at that time.
Congratulations, you're one of the greatest.
During the 60s, the only thing the people in the state of Alabama could be proud of was the football team. Bear Bryant was like a hero here in the state of Alabama.
Everybody knew Bear Bryant. Who's the president? Do they have a president? What's it? No. It was the Bear and his football.
Get that defense.
He gave to white Alabamians a respect from the people in the rest of the country that they got from no other source.
Alabama was now defined by its football and its politics.
You know, the old metaphor about you don't want to wrestle the pig because you'll get muddy and the pig will enjoy it. And I think that's very much the attitude that Bryant had toward Wallace. It was clear that they both kept their distance.
Bryant was also trying to keep his distance from the politics of the time, but the issue of race was becoming unavoidable.
There was an article in the Look magazine in November of 1965, and there was a piece in there on Bryant, and said, we're not recruiting black players now, but it's going to be real soon that it's coming, you know, to Alabama and all the SEC.
On the field, Bryant was still on top, and by 1965 had won 3 national championships. But winning with all white players was sending its own message.
The winning ability of Bear Bryant solidified the political dogma of George Wallace.
As long as they were winning with white players, then they were going to stick with the white players. I hated the University of Alabama sports, and I wanted them to lose.
By 1966, playing in an all-white conference was beginning to pose a problem for Alabama.
They started out as the 2-time defending national champion. Started the season, preseason, #1.
Won all of our games. I don't think there were 50 points scored on us the entire game, entire year total, and wound up #3.
Notre Dame and Michigan State were ranked 1 and 2, and yet Alabama, the only team with an unblemished record, was ranked 3rd.
Many people posit the idea that because they didn't leave their small section of the country to play integrated teams, that this was a message to them.
Little known during this period is that Alabama was trying to schedule a good integrated team from the north, but including Boston College, but they wouldn't come to Alabama to play because of George Wallace and Bull Connor and all of the negativity swirling in the ether.
And at a staff meeting later, Coach Bryant got up before his assistants and apologized and said, I take full responsibility for losing the national championship. And he said, I make this promise to you now. We will play tougher opponents, and we will have black faces in our lineup.
Though the team remained all white, the future was not lost on Bryant.
He came over, I never shall forget, he came over and talked to us. Said, you got a boy named Davis up there. I said, fullback. Said, I want him so bad I don't know what to do, but I can't take him now. He says, the alumni is not ready for black players. But one day I'll be able to get those good ball players. The time is not right. They won't let me take them here. But had it been left to the Bear, he would have taken them right then and there. He was after a ball player.
Though the seeds of integration had begun spreading in the ACC, the 2 other Southern conferences resisted. Black student athletes talented enough to play college ball still had to look elsewhere.
I started thinking about this whole issue of race, about segregation, about having a degree. So I called the college coach at Morgan, told him who I was, told him I was interested in attending his school.
Baltimore's Morgan State University is one of many historically black schools found mostly in the South. Their purpose was to give black students the same opportunities as whites, in the classroom and on the field.
It had nothing to do with playing ball. It had to do with paying for the education, but there was no logic in thinking about pro football because there were no black middle linebackers playing full time.
But by going to Morgan State, Lanier was able to play middle linebacker, which, along with quarterback, was considered a white player's position. For Lanier, attending a black college also gave him a sense of belonging, both socially and culturally.
I was told by my high school coach that the University of Missouri with Dan Devine, he had indicated some interest, but that would have been a great challenge going from Virginia to Missouri. The social involvement would have probably been 0, and coming from a segregated environment, well, that was not something I would have had interest in anyway.
In part, as a result of segregation, the football programs at black colleges were highly successful.
Historically, black colleges had all the talent. And in having all the talent, the performance level was extremely high.
The schools were coached by legendary figures. Eddie Robinson at Grambling, Jake Gaither at Florida A&M, and Earl Banks at Morgan State. It's no wonder these schools became a breeding ground for the NFL. Between 1960 and 1970, over 300 players were drafted by professional teams.
I only played in 2 losing games at Morgan. We ended up playing in 3 bowl games while I was there, 2 against Florida A&M and 1 against Westchester in the Tangerine Bowl.
It was one of the few times in history that a black school was invited to play an integrated team in a big-time bowl.
It's not a traditional black bowl at that time, and it's Westchester State College, which is a predominantly white team, which we had never played.
It was one of then really seeing how you measured against that team.
Morgan State beat Westchester 14-6 to cap its undefeated season, and Willie Lanier was the game's MVP. But for Lanier, the victory was about much more than football.
For us, it was one of another step in a maturation process at a college that was trying to prepare you for the bigger world. And the bigger world involved, obviously, the white world versus everything being in the black sphere. And I think that became a very positive aspect of that.
Lanier graduated from Morgan State, and in 1967 began his Hall of Fame career as a middle linebacker with the Kansas City Chiefs. Another NFL draft pick that same year took a different path to the pros.
I just want to go to Texas. I called Darrell Royal. I said, Coach, can I come to the University of Texas? He said, Bubba, I could probably get you a scholarship, but I don't know when the football program is going to integrate.
Bubba Smith attended high school in Beaumont, Texas, but like other Southern blacks, he would have to leave home to play big-time college ball.
In the 1960s, Duffy Daugherty was running the football equivalent of the Underground Railroad, bringing Southern blacks to Michigan State and building a powerhouse around them. Foremost was the great Bubba Smith.
When I got up there, it was like, where am I? I had never talked to a white person before. They got 47,000 students there, and 360 are black. And Duffy had already told us that, you know, you can't date any white girls.
Everywhere he went, Smith experienced culture shock.
I had never seen any snow other than on TV. And I went to sleep, and I woke up the next morning, they had snow everywhere. And I'm cool, got my books, going to class, hit some ice and wind, feet went up in the air. I turned around and went back to my room. I said, no, I don't like the snow. Mother made sure that we had grits and eggs, and bacon and toast. And I get up there, hash browns. What the hell is hash browns for breakfast? And I'm looking for something to eat. And I saw these things that looked like saltine crackers, and I grabbed me one. I bit on it, and it tastes like paper. And I said, what is this? Matzah. You know, I said, matzah? They got a food named matzah? After that, I asked about everything before I stuck it in my mouth. I got homesick, and you know, they were trying to get me to go to spring break. I said, shit, I'm going home, man. You know, we have a party every night at Miles.
Bubba Smith had an extraordinary college career. He was a two-time All-American and a #1 draft pick. But not being able to play in his home state of Texas still hurts.
I didn't have no anger. The only thing I wanted to know was, why is it that you don't like me and you don't even know me?
In 1966, while Smith was still at Michigan State, the Southwest Conference underwent a great change. John Westbrook became a non-scholarship player at Baylor University, and at Southern Methodist, the football coach made integration his goal.
As a youngster, I'd grown up with the African Americans out in a little West Texas town of Odessa. If we rode the bus, they had to sit in the back of the bus. Well, about 8th or 9th grade, it dawned on me, something's not right. And so I made a commitment. If I ever got into a position where I could help my black friends, I was going to do it. And so when I was offered the head job at SMU, I said, yeah, I'll take it if you will let me bring in some black players. Frankly, it took us 2 years of screening to find Jerry Levice.
Well, I grew up in Beaumont, Texas.
When I came out of high school, I had some 90 to 100 different offers, but there were none from the Southwest Conference. All of a sudden, one day in the afternoon, my coach called me and said, Jerry, there's somebody that wants to talk to you. Coach Fry walks in to me and says, I'm Hayden Fry, and I want to talk to you about going to school. My father sitting in the corner didn't ask anything except for, where is this school located? And he said, in Dallas. He said, Dallas? He said, they shot the president. They might shoot my son.
It was going to be difficult, there wasn't any question, and I told Jerry that. He would be the first African-American in the Southwest Conference on scholarship.
Once at SMU, Levias found out just what he was in for.
The first day of practice when I realized this was going to be tough, when your own teammate spits on you and you're on the ground about to get up and then he kicks you in the back and breaks your ribs.
The pain Levias would be forced to endure was not limited to the football field.
I would start receiving hate mail and people telling me, sending me one-way tickets back to Africa. A lot of people did not want their sons to play with me, so it wasn't the best part of my life.
He'd come in and he'd have his head down, and I'd say, Levi, you got a problem? Tell me about it.
Coach Fry used to tell me, his old saying was, if you don't want them to get your goat, don't let them know where it's hid. I had to learn to not feel sorry for myself. Even when I wanted to cry, I couldn't. And that just became me. No emotions. I was in a world by myself.
In his first varsity season, 1966, Levias made his presence known.
Levias, look at those hands.
Levias led SMU into national contention.
Touchdown, SMU.
If we beat TCU, we win the conference championship. You ride into the stadium. I get off the bus, I got these policemen escorting me into the stadium, and I'm thinking, hey, man, big game, movie star, red carpet treatment, everything, so I'm huge. I'm the star.
But it wasn't the fans Levias needed protection from. A phone call to the university warned of a possible tragedy.
The threat was that I was going to be shot, and there's going to be a sniper in the stands. So I said, Levi, your life's been threatened. And he said, we're going to do what we can to protect you, so. Okay, Coach, if you say so, I'm fine. I'm gonna play. There's no problem with me.
Playing under a cloud of fear, Levias was undaunted. He caught a 65-yard touchdown pass and led SMU to its first conference title in 18 years. Southern Methodist ended the season ranked 9th in the nation, a turnaround not possible without Levias.
But when the game was over with, you look around, it's like a skunk in the locker room. Everybody else is gone. Of course, I had that one alternative. The door was always open for me to leave, but I didn't want to let Coach Fry down because he put his livelihood, his family's life, and everybody on the line for me.
By internalizing the abuse he suffered at SMU, Levias managed to survive. But midway through his senior year, he had had enough.
One football game in particular, a young man on the other team tackled him, good, clean, hard tackle, but he rolled over on top of Jerry, spit in his face, made some real strong racial remarks.
I lost it. I quit. I came to the sidelines, I threw my helmet down, and I told Coach Fry, I quit. I don't have to take this shit.
He was crying. It was a tie ball game at the time, 14-14. And I told Jerry, I said, Jerry, are you going to let a guy like that help defeat us?
I get up and I'm fired up and I run off into the field and I'm going out there, I'm gonna run it back and I'm steaming, I'm hating.
He runs out to about the hash mark on the field and he turns around, and this is like the Babe Ruth story where Babe Ruth pointed his bat and told the youngster, I'm gonna hit a home run for you. Jerry turned around and he said, Coach, I'm gonna run this punt back all the way. 88 or 89 yards after he caught the punt, crisscrossing the field, and he makes a touchdown. I mean, we win the ball game 21-14.
That's the worst touchdown because it broke me. I did it out of hate, not for the love of the game. And that hate kind of carried me on a little bit and changed my whole personality. And that's the first time I've ever really hated white people. I think it crippled me.
Despite the scars Levias endured, his courage helped open doors in the Southwest Conference.
Still healing. still healing 40 years later.
By 1966, the SEC was the only segregated conference left in the country. That year, Kentucky awarded football scholarships to African Americans Nat Northington and Greg Page. But NCAA rules prevented freshmen from playing varsity, so the pair were a year away from their historic season. In the meantime, they helped recruit black high school players for Kentucky and went after Lexington's own Wilbur Hackett.
Greg's pitch to me was, we need your help. We need more African Americans to come here to the University of Kentucky to play.
You know, our friends, they couldn't understand why in the world we would let our son go to the University of Kentucky. But he said they really wanted him there. It would be good for the school and would be good for Kentucky.
In 1967, Hackett accepted a scholarship along with African American running back Houston Hogg. As the season approached, Page and Northington, now eligible to play varsity, stood on the precipice of history. But first, they would have to endure preseason practice.
They were doing what we call a pursuit drill. It's where the runner goes to one side and everybody pursues to the ball. But when Greg got there first, someone hit him in the back and Greg fell to the ground. I don't think he ever regained consciousness.
Page suffered a spinal injury and died 38 days later. Northington, left to integrate the SEC by himself, soon became despondent and confided in freshman players Hackett and Hogg.
He said, I don't have anybody I can really talk to about what's going on with me. He said, but I really need to go. You all have to stay. He said, because somebody's got to do this and you all have got to do it. He said, but personally, he said, I can't handle it anymore. He quietly, he left. And he didn't tell the coaches or anything. I wanted to leave too. Of course, my parents encouraged me to stay.
You knew when you came it was not going to be easy, but you chose this path, and don't let nobody take it away from you.
Carrying on the mission, Hackett and Hogg returned to Kentucky for their sophomore season. Their first road game came against Ole Miss, where memories of James Meredith's ordeal were still fresh.
We purposely missed the bus, and we weren't going to Jackson, Mississippi. We were afraid to go. We just didn't want to go.
His mother and I talked about it all week. Oh, honey, I just think one of us, we ought to try to go.
But when I looked around at the crowd, it looked more like a lynch mob than a football stadium full of fans.
When Wilbur saw me, I can truly say it is one time that I can say son was glad to see father. Father was glad to see son.
I almost cried. So I was just glad he was there for that support.
They did let me stand down on the sideline, and there was some comments behind me about this young man. They were calling him Leroy.
The state troopers had no problem making their little comments like, hit Leroy again. So instead of using the N-word, they used the word Leroy.
But on the very next play, this Leroy busts through Mississippi's line, and the next thing I know, they were helping Archie Manning off the ground. And I turned around and I said, boy, did you see what Leroy did? And I shut up after that.
Despite the ugly abuse, Hackett could claim a measure of victory.
Made me feel 10 feet tall because of the fact that here is something that I have wanted to do all my life, and now I am able to sit here and watch my son perform on that football field.
For Hackett and other groundbreakers like him, performing on the football field was not their only responsibility.
Integration is like being dropped behind enemy lines. The big thing about integration was they weren't going to take on your customs and your things. You had to totally assimilate.
Tom Gossam was the first African-American athlete to graduate from Alabama's Auburn University.
I left the comfort of segregation for the discomfort of integration.
But as time went on, the Black pioneers wanted more than just a place on campus. They wanted a voice.
We ended up having a march to the president's office. It's probably the funniest march you've ever seen because there's only about 12 of us, 15 of us. Nobody even knew we were marching. They just figured we were going to lunch or something. But the assistant head football coach told us that we couldn't do things like that because we were football players. The best thing we could do for black people would to be good on the field. The games we played were far more important than who won and who lost, because all the black people in the state were counting on us. We were doing what they never had the chance to do, but we were doing it as an extension of them. We were carrying all their hopes. It was all on us. And so it made it very, very difficult. It was always about more than the game. Always about more than the game.
Though all three conferences were now integrated, many teams still were not, including Alabama. And while Bryant bided his time, he kept his coach's eye sharp.
The old legend of Alabama lore is that Bear Bryant reportedly said, "I won't be the first to integrate, but I won't be the third."
In the spring of 1967, Alabama convened for spring football practice, and something was a little different. 5 African Americans walked on to the Alabama football team, players who don't have scholarships but basically want to go out for the team.
We were pretty well loaded with personnel then. They were contributors, but they weren't deliverers. In other words, they'd get to play but not accomplish that much.
None of the original 5 African-American walk-ons made the team.
That's what got me first involved about changing the football program, suing Bear Bryant.
Not that much has really changed concerning the black students' position on campus.
Frustrated over waiting for their football program to integrate, Alabama's African American Student Association filed suit in July 1969.
I actually met with Bear Bryant to suggest to him that he should spend more effort in trying to recruit black players. His initial response was that he couldn't find any.
Well, we haven't had so far any, if many, if any, that qualified academically and athletically both. But
before the suit went to trial, everything changed. In January 1970, the NCAA added an extra game to the college schedule. Bryant used the opportunity to make good on his promise to play better teams. He knew just who to call.
Paul Bryant and John McKay, their friendship was unbelievable.
Coach McKay's USC Trojans were as dominant in the West as Bryant's Crimson Tide had been in the South.
Coach says, "Paul, what's this all about?" He says, "John, how would you all like come down and play us in Alabama next year?" And I didn't realize what we were getting into. I really didn't.
USC was coming off an undefeated season. Alabama, which had won 3 national championships in the 60s, was trying to recover from a subpar year, but the dynamics of this game were undeniable.
Having an all-black backfield, led by a black quarterback in Birmingham, Alabama, in the Deep South, going against a team that was all white.
Here it is, Legion Field, just a few blocks from where Bull Connor pushed Alabama a little deeper into the darkness. Just a few blocks from the 16th Street Baptist Church where those 4 little girls were murdered in the name of segregation. This is a great moment for Alabama because this is a moment when Alabama transcended its history.
Knock him down, beautiful.
Coach Bryant he sort of set the tone for everything, and he just approached it like you would any other game. He never made any reference to the fact that there were African-American athletes and we were going to be playing against them.
On Friday, September 11th, USC flew to Alabama. The reception in Birmingham was unlike any they had ever seen.
Now, everyone's nervous because it's the first game of the year, but going there, and then the reception we received, my goodness, everyone in the state was there. Every high school band they could find. Thousands of people cheering, not a black face at the airport.
When we rode down the streets, you see people on their front porches or hanging out the windows, and you could feel that the African Americans in Alabama at that time were rooting for us because here was another opportunity to step up and say, yes, we can.
I remember asking my father before I went on this trip, I said, well, you know, what should I do? How should I act? And, you know, he sat there for a couple minutes and looked at me. He said, well, don't do anything stupid. Be respectful of how the way things are down there.
Many of us had no idea of what the South was really like, other than what we had seen on TV and what we read. Guys talked about weapons. Do you think we're gonna need to have weapons with us and all that kind of stuff? And Toady, I'm gonna take me a gun, man. I'm gonna take me a gun.
Toady Smith, Bubba's younger brother, had grown up in segregated Beaumont, Texas.
Lo and behold, we get down to Alabama and we're in the hotel. All of a sudden, Toady goes to his bag and pulls out this gun and goes, hey, man, you did bring a gun. Man, put that thing away. You know, are you crazy? What's going on? Hey, man, I don't know what's gonna happen down here.
Well, I just remember there was a lot of excitement in the air. It was something new. We'd never played any California teams from the West Coast.
What surprised me was that it was not on television. It was a Saturday night game.
And the place was jammed. You couldn't get a seat in there. When they play that Alabama fight song, man, they go nuts.
You couldn't get a ticket. In fact, I don't remember how I got an hour or two at that time. Pretty good seats. About the 40-yard line, midway. I was a USC fan first that night. Alabama was second.
When the USC's team came out on the field, this fan said, I thought we were supposed to be playing some school from California. Hell, that's Grambling.
First game Sam Cunningham ever played, and I says, Coach, why don't we take a look at this kid from Santa Barbara? And we put him in there, and wow.
I remember Sam Cunningham doing wind sprints up and down the field.
First 2 or 3 possessions of the football, on either side, we realized we were in for a bad, bad, bad night. He taught us how a fullback's supposed to run with the football.
Sam Cunningham's first varsity game was unforgettable. He scored 2 touchdowns in the first quarter and ran for 135 yards.
Even though it was 42-21, the game was over long before, so they had a long time to think about what happened that evening.
I just remember how happy all the black people were that they'd beaten them, and they'd beaten them with black guys.
We had something to prove. It's hard to believe, to fathom that here you're witnessing history, witnessing what you had always wanted to be and see.
I was proud because black players had played a very important role in that game. It wasn't just that they were on the team, they were running all over people.
And finally, here's Coach Bryant, who's an imposing man. And he's smiling. And he says, John, I can't thank you all for what you did for me today. And I went, what? Why?
I think he really wanted to make a statement to the fans of Alabama to say, look, folks, if we're going to compete in the 1970s, skin color should not matter any longer.
In an irony not lost on those who were there, Birmingham, the center of unrest during the Civil Rights era, had become the stage for a game that symbolized racial progress.
The stadium's nearly empty. Outside, we hear a roar. What is it? We don't know. Hundreds of black people had gathered outside the stadium who could not go in the stadium, don't have tickets to that stadium, and have never really been in that stadium. But they're listening on transistor radios and celebrating our victory.
You could see the pride in their eyes as if they had played the game and had won the game themselves. It was a really good feeling to think that we might have done something very, very significant for our African-American brothers and sisters who were in the Deep South.
It was a monumental thing. It was as big as many of the things that happened in the Civil Rights Movement. And of course, the scuttlebutt on the streets was that Sam Cunningham did more for integration than Martin Luther King.
Cunningham probably had nothing to do with Alabama integrating. Probably what he had something to do with those 73,000 fans that were sitting in that stands and saw Sam Cunningham, and they said, good gosh, we got to get us a Sam Cunningham.
I remember there was an incident the next morning when I was sitting having breakfast before I was to catch my plane out of Birmingham. I overheard some Alabamians a table or two away, and I remember one of the men said, boy, I bet the Bear Wishes he had some of them Negro boys on his team. They were huge. And that told me right there that I think Bear Bryant was crazy like a fox to schedule this game.
Regardless of his reasons for playing USC, Bryant had already signed his first black player. Sitting in the crowd was freshman Wilbur Jackson, who had accepted a scholarship before the season started. Bryant added his second black player the next year in 1971, when junior college transfer John Mitchell became the school's first African-American to play in a varsity game. The tide had finally turned at Alabama.
Coach Bryant was surrounded by reporters, and one reporter asked him, "How many black players you have?" Coach Bryant answered and said, "I don't have any black players." He said, "Okay, well, how many white players you have?" Coach Bryant said, "I don't have any white players." He said, "I just have players." Coach Bryant wanted the best players he can get, and with him, he didn't care what color you were, as long as you could come there and be an asset to the university, be a good student, and play good football.
By 1972, the last of the all-white teams joined Alabama, and for the first time, every major football program in America was integrated.
As Alabama and the rest of the South embraced integration, Bear Bryant's Crimson Tide returned to prominence, winning 3 national championships in the 1970s.
It was an honor to play for a great coach, to get a great education, and stay right there in the state of Alabama where your family, friends could watch you play every week.
Alabama's success was emblematic of far greater changes across the South. The long and painstaking struggle to integrate college football had at last come to an end.
The burden was there. It became clear to me how important it was not to fail.
In no small measure, college football had played a role in the integration of the South.
I do get a great feeling when a lot of young men know about my story and they come by and they say thank you. I think I did something good. I did something great. And I'm just really beginning to appreciate that.
Those who a decade earlier had stood up to bigotry could not help but feel a sense of pride at the legacy they had made possible.
But when I look around and I see 11 African-American football players on defense, and I look over there and there's a black quarterback, it makes me feel good just because I know where it was and where it is now.